So thank you all for coming. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free. I'm sure many of you know each other already, and it's really great to see such a nice range of people from different organisations and some friendly faces here. For those of you who've not been to one of our tea breaks before, these are recorded sessions. We will turn the recording off for the discussion part of the session. So it's just the presentation that we'll record. So you'll be able to access that on our website, should you want to rewatch it many times over or share it with colleagues. We've also got simultrans available for this session. So I am going to be presenting in English, I'm afraid, but should you like to contribute to the chat afterwards in Welsh, you are by all means welcome to do that. And for those of you who I forgot to check this beforehand, actually. For those of you who are not familiar with accessing the simultrans, sorry, I'm used to doing this on Teams, so I'm a little bit forgetful of how to do it on Zoom. There should be settings to access the English audio for this session on your screen. Is everyone able to access that okay?
Nancy, just to jump in, just to say if anyone does need a hand accessing that or the captions, just drop a message in the chat and I can help as best I can.
Great, thank you. There we go. Yeah, just click interpretation and hit English on that. Thank you, Laura. So I'm trying to do too many things at one time. Read the chat, present, and explain it to everyone. Great. Yes, simultrans available, recorded. In terms of comments, feel free to pop comments in the chat as we go. I'll probably return to them at the end of the session, rather than interrupt the presentation unless there's something super pertinent to the slide that's up at that moment. So here we go. It's nice to have a tea break about Wales. So normally our sessions, these sessions are, the T stands for Talking Evidence and Audiences. Normally we share kind of specific or general insights that are relevant to the whole of the UK. But this time we are focusing in on Wales, thanks to a bit of analysis that we've just done as part of our work for the Arts Council of Wales. So we've recently published our first Wales audience report in a little while, but we're hoping to make these a little bit more of a regular occurrence. So I'll talk about that a bit more later as well. So I'm going to present for the first half hour. We're going to look at the key findings from that report, but we've also done a little bit of bonus analysis. So I think there were some questions that came out of the report actually that we wanted to look into a bit further. So we've looked at one extra kind of bit of analysis since the report. I'll be sharing the findings today for that. And then we'll have 15 minutes at the end, hopefully, to just have a little bit of a chat about those findings. I think these events are really nice opportunities for us to hear from you and understand if kind of what we're seeing in the data matches what you're seeing on the ground, and just get your thoughts really on what these findings might say about the state of the sector. And we can talk about some of our wider work as well around kind of cultural policy and joining up data sets in Wales that might be relevant as well to these findings. So I'm Nancy Sheterline. I'm head of Wales and senior consultant at the Audience Agency, but I'm part of a kind of wider Wales team at the Audience Agency. So I'm just going to let those of our TAA team from Wales who are on the call say hello as well, and introduce themselves to you. I'm going to pick Laura. Are you happy to start?
Yeah, Prynawn da bawb, Shmai Laura Drain dwi pennaeth ymgysylltu dynas y gyda Audience Agency. Sorry, I forgot the translation was switched on. I was going to do it in both languages. So that's awkward. I'm Laura Drain and I'm head of civic engagement at the Audience Agency, and I joined in September last year. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And I think we've also got Gemma on the call as well, if you want to say hello.
Hi everyone, lots of familiar faces today. That's lovely to see. I'm Gemma Hicks. I'm the Senior Consultant for Community Engagement and Participation. And I also started the summer last year in August. But it's nice to see some lovely colleagues from Wales in the room today.
Thank you. So yes, as you can see, our Wales team has expanded, which has been excellent. So lots of extra brains in our team with knowledge of the ground on Wales as well. So to start off, just to look at the data that we've analysed, that these findings have come from. This is essentially our kind of national cultural engagement data set from our Audience Answers platform. So via Audience Answers, any organisation working in the arts or cultural sector in Wales can access survey or ticketing analysis. And as well as giving them the opportunity to understand their own audiences through that analysis dashboard, it also gives us the opportunity to aggregate that data and look at the national picture and do analysis as and when is useful. So there are 52 Welsh organisations currently using the platform. If you've got good eyesight, you can read the list on the right of the page there, and you can see the kind of numbers of survey responses that have been pulled into the reports analysis and tickets sold as well. And then we've also used additional benchmark data from local market size estimate and also the census. So our key findings. So I think the main finding that came out of this report, I don't know whether you've read it or not, but hopefully this will give you a good overview today, is essentially what we found is that organisations in Wales seem to be doing more with less. I've done it. Sorry, what a typo. Doing more with less. No, doing less with more. Oh my gosh, sorry. Doing more with less. I apologies for that. What we've essentially found is that we've looked at 2024-25 data compared to 2019-20 data. So it's kind of rough comparison between pre-pandemic and current times. And when we look at the UK data set, what we see is that programming across that time period has risen 25%, but tickets sales have only increased 6%. Whereas in Wales, the picture is the opposite. Welsh organisations are programming more events, but only 3% more events than pre-pandemic. Whereas ticket sales are up 26%. So it shows that essentially those audiences are growing per event. And it's not just ticket sales that seem to be doing well in Wales. So this graph here shows bookings, income, tickets, and performance. This is just the Wales data now. We're not looking at the UK data set. But ticket income has actually been the thing that's risen the most across that period. So it's been a 58% increase in ticket income across that 5-year period, or a 27% increase in real terms. But again, that's very different to the UK picture. So across the UK, we've actually seen ticket income decrease by 3%. So that's sales overall. We've also done a little bit of analysis on specific art forms. I will say that not all art forms are kind of represented in depth if you read the full report, and that's simply due to us just picking those art forms where we've got a really robust data set. For some art forms, we simply didn't have enough ticket sales to be able to kind of make robust findings with a kind of small margin of error. But we did pick out, I think it's 6 art forms overall that we looked into a bit more depth in the full report. In terms of kind of programming levels, I think the key thing that we found art form wise was that actually fewer art forms in Wales now fit neatly into traditional genres or art forms. So in the 2024-25 data, there's a lot more events that are either classified as other or classified as kind of some of those more general art forms. So art form classifications like general entertainment or so on. For those art forms, events that we were able to kind of tag with a very specific art form, we compared how the data, how the programming had increased or decreased. What we saw was that for dance and music, programming was increasing in Wales. But compared to 5 years ago, there were fewer family events and musicals being programmed. And again, that is a very different picture to the UK more widely, where actually there are more family events being programmed. And programming for dance and music has stayed fairly consistent across the UK instead of increasing as it has in Wales. We also looked at audiences by art form, and there were specific characteristics that were identifiable. So both in demographics, but also in terms of behaviours of audiences for different art forms. There were some art forms where it was much more likely that audiences would return and re-attend that art form within a year, and some art forms where that was not the case. And certainly different kind of audience groups. When we looked at our audience spectrum profiling, different art forms tended to attract different groups. I won't go through all of the different art form audiences in today's session. You can see some pages from the report on the left of this slide. So I'd say do have a look at the full report. We'll share some links with the slides after the session as well. And Megan might even be popping the link into the chat for you right now. But there's a little bit of info. We've provided a bit of a summary of each art form audience, but also some tips as well on how to action that evidence. And the other thing we did in this report was actually to split up the data by venue scale, which is the first time I think we've done that for our Wales analysis, and was actually really, really interesting. So when we looked at that in terms of art form programming, what we found were a few things. Firstly, that films made up a much higher proportion of events at smaller venues. We saw that the medium scale venues had the highest proportions of plays or drama out of any venues. We saw that the dance was more common at mid and large scale venues. And that issue I was talking about a minute ago about art forms, kind of events being harder to classify by art forms. This seemed to be particularly the case for events at larger venues, where actually 31% of events fell under the categories general entertainment or other art forms, which was really interesting. And just to give you a sense of how we broke up those scales, we looked at the capacity of all the venues that we were dealing with that were in the data set, and tried to find where it made sense to kind of break up those the capacity into different groups. So the groupings that we ended up going with was the small venues included all venues up to 350 capacity. Medium venues were venues with 351 to 750 capacity. And those large venues were any venues which had 750 capacity plus. Just to give you a sense, that might help you make sense of who is included in each cohort. Then on to, I think, what this question we were looking to answer was, which is who is attending, who is engaging, who isn't. So what we really wanted to know was to what extent arts and culture in Wales is serving communities, and how can we find the answer to that? So we did some audience spectrum profiling. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, audience spectrum is our segmentation tool. We've essentially broken down the UK population into 10 different groups based on how they engage with culture and other characteristics, including demographics, things like their life scale, whether they have life stage, whether they have children in the household, and so on. Essentially created 10 groups based on how they engage with culture and assigned those groupings to every household in the UK. So it's a really good lens to look at audiences through. And essentially, we found some differences through our audience spectrum profiling when we looked at venue scale. So I think what we're seeing is that different-sized venues are serving communities in different ways and to different extents. Obviously, we're looking at these groups. We're not speaking for individual organisations. We know that individual organisations are all doing different things. But on the whole, we found that larger venues in Wales tend to be engaging more commuter line culture buffs and dormitory dependables. So these are both groups who are quite highly culturally engaged already. They are both slightly older audience groups. Your commuter line culture buffs, more kind of traditional cultural interests, whereas your dormitory dependables, a little bit more mainstream interests. Then moving on to the mid-scale venues, we found that actually these venues seem to be reaching more families. And while they were also attracting older audiences, they tended to be better at engaging those kind of less culturally engaged audiences who were older. So we saw higher proportions of trips and treats. That's a kind of very busy family group, likely to have kind of older children in the household, or parents of children who'd kind of flown the nest recently. And then we've got home and heritage. So I think we regularly refer to these as our national trust goers. These are an older group with slightly lower cultural engagement than some of those other groups we just talked about, commuter land culture buffs and dormitory dependables. Smaller venues seemed to be slightly different again. So these venues tended to have a greater connection with younger generations, and again, particularly those from higher engaged cultural segments, but the younger end of those. So we got high levels of experience seekers. These are kind of students, young professionals, very kind of socially motivated culturally, and metroculturals who are the highest engaged out of all of the cultural segments. So these are the people likely to be going to most things. Not very many of them in Wales, but they do make up quite a large percentage of the audiences relatively to the population levels. I think on the smaller venues, it is worth noting that, as I did say before, we did see that smaller venues tended to be programming a higher level of kind of film events, and those experience seekers and metroculturals make up a really big part of film audiences. So I think there's possibly a programming element there too, just to bear in mind. And on this next slide, it's an interesting graph. I'm going to explain this one because it's one of those complicated graphs that says lots of things at the same time. So what we're looking at here is, as you can see, each of those circles represents one of our audience spectrum segments. So DD for dependables, CC for commuter line culture buffs, and so on. And the size of those circles makes up shows us the proportion of that segment within the overall audience group. So you can see that a large proportion of audiences in Wales are either dormitory dependables, commuter line culture buffs, or trips and treats as well. The second thing that this chart is showing is the extent to which these groups whether these groups are attending more or less. So if we look at the horizontal line here, that's the index for 2019, 2020, and the extent to which one of those circles is higher or lower, in this case, they're all higher, other than that line, shows how much they've increased or decreased relative to 2019-20. So you can see that groups whose engagement has increased the most are at the top. These are frontline families, trips and treats, and metro culturals are near the top as well. Whereas there are some groups whose engagement has stayed relatively similar, just increasing slightly. Those are the home and heritage and supported communities, which is one of the least engaged groups culturally. These tend to be people with quite significant barriers to engagement with culture. And the third thing that this graph is showing us is actually to what extent each of these groups are overrepresented or underrepresented in the audience data compared to population levels. So this is looking at the vertical line now. Anything to the right of that line, so you can see at the far extreme end, we've got metroculturals way over on the right of the screen. And this shows that metroculturals show up in the audience data as being way overrepresented compared to the levels of metroculturals households within the population in Wales, which makes sense as a highly engaged group. And there are other groups as well which are overrepresented in the audience data. So these are commuter line culture buffs, these are dormitory dependables. And there are some groups on the left which are underrepresented in the audience data. So they exist in the population in levels which don't match the levels to which they're represented in the data. They're not attending as often. Okay, now we're moving on to the bonus bit of analysis that we did. So once we published our Wales report, we were interested to see, I think having seen that kind of growth in sales, we kind of wanted to see where that growth was happening a little bit more and understand a bit more about the extent to which communities were being engaged. So we did an analysis of the Booker data against the Welsh indices of multiple deprivation. So I imagine most of you are familiar with these with Welsh indices of multiple deprivation, but essentially it's a model whereby deprivation levels can be measured against different domains. So it looks at whether people are experiencing one or more of these domains to measure the level of deprivation of an area. So it looks at the proportion of people with low income. It looks at unemployment as one of the measures, or economic inactivity. It looks at low health indicators, illness, mortality, mental health. It looks at low levels of educational attainment or access to learning. It looks at low levels of access to services, housing conditions such as overcrowding or homelessness. It looks at community safety levels in the community, so crime rates and things like that. And it also looks at the physical environment, so air quality, flooding risk, and a number of other environmental conditions. So we compared Booker data, the Welsh indices of multiple deprivation in 2019-20, the same for 2024-25. And what we did see was that there isn't a huge amount of change. It is mostly the same, but there are more people, there are less people in the more recent data experiencing the highest levels of deprivation in Wales than there was pre-pandemic. And actually, if you look at the kind of those within the first 5 deciles, the most deprived deciles, in 2019-20, that made up 41% of audiences, and last year it made up 39% of audiences. So the number of people living in areas of multiple deprivation and attending arts and cultural events is decreasing, which I think says something interesting. So to summarise, I think in overall sales and income, Welsh organisations are performing well compared to the rest of the UK, doing more with less. Secondly, platforms and scales of organisations each play different roles in serving communities. And then that final factor, I think growth and engagement doesn't tell the whole story. While it's great to be able to kind of pat ourselves on the back, I think what we're seeing is perhaps a pivot towards more commercially successful activity potentially. It seems like that engagement with communities in deprived areas of Wales is declining for whatever reason. So I'm going to hand over to everyone to discuss these findings, if anyone's feeling brave or has any thoughts on these things. Some of the things that went through my head when I was reading this report and writing this report was obviously what we're able to say with this evidence is what is happening in Wales. The question I'm interested in most is why is it happening? And I think I'd be interested to hear everyone's views on that. The other thing, as I was saying, we're hoping to do analysis on the Wales data sets a little bit more regularly from now on, and publishing an annual report. And I think we'd be really interested to know what we should include next time, what gaps you felt were in the current report. And really, I mean, when we're doing this analysis, we're trying to do things that are going to be most useful to you, things, evidence that you can actually apply in your day-to-day strategic work, in your day-to-day tactical work. So understanding what is most useful from your point of view is really key for us. And then also understanding how to join up those kind of cultural engagement trends with wider national data sets to measure the impacts of engagement. I'm mentioning that for a specific purpose because it's something I just want to flag with you. On that first one, I think, yeah, as I was saying, what are your experiences? And do they tally? You know, do we think that this is an outcome of funding pressures to some extent? I'd be interested to hear your views. On that second point of what useful to include in the next report, you know, is there a piece of the evidence picture here that's missing? And what do you think that is? And the reason I wanted to flag kind of that joining up the dots aspect between data sets is because I can't take any credit for this, but my amazing colleagues have been part of a really, really interesting project you might already be aware of, called the National Cultural Data Observatory. And that aims to do just that. There's a launch event online on June 8th, and I highly recommend, if any of you are interested in this, to join that and see the progress so far. So there's already a blueprint, a template for working with different data sets, health data sets, cultural data sets, engagement data sets, to really begin to measure where there are patterns and to make that more accessible to everybody as a whole on a national level, but also on a regional level. So yeah, on that note, I'm going to hand over to you. Has anyone got any thoughts?